Kelly. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm a little bit louder than Mr. Tom was. It is so great to be with you today. Had the joy of having a full Philly experience today. Went to the Museum of Art, pretended like we were in the marathon, went to the Liberty Bell, Chinatown, had a Philly at Reading Station. Is that Reading Terminal Market? Yes. So we had the full Philly experience, and now I get to be with all of you. So thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. Wanted to share a little bit of my story. You know, when we're in the pro-life movement, for many of us, a lot of the young people in the room, can we give it up for all the young people in the room? Love it. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Keep coming to every of these events that you can, because us old people need you here. It's hard to kind of understand for some of us the realities of abortion. You know, a lot of people just grew up being pro-life and grew up understanding the sanctity of life. And I'm so thankful for those people. But then there's people like myself who didn't grow up pro-life, didn't grow up understanding the realities of abortion, grew up a Christian, grew up in a loving home, but really not understanding the realities of what abortion was. And I was a confused young person. I was a child who was picked on and bullied. I was a freshman in high school looking for belonging. And I went to a party, and I went trying to fit in. I actually snuck out and went to this party. And one of the popular boys came over to me and said, "Hey, Kelly, let's go for a walk." And I thought, wow, this boy likes me. Okay, let's go for this walk. And while we were on that walk, he raped me. And I came back to the party. I got my friends. I went home the next day. I told them what had happened. And they said, "Now, Kelly, why would he do that? He could have anybody that he wanted." And I felt unloved, and I felt unworthy. And I went to my youth pastor a couple days later, and I explained to her what happened. And she said, "Well, Kelly, if you'd never snuck out and gone to that party, that would have never happened to you." And again, I felt that shame. I felt unworthy. I felt like I had done something wrong. And so I ran to the place where I could find acceptance, or what I felt like was acceptance. And that was in the arms of young men. And by the time I was 15, I was pregnant. And we went to my boyfriend's mom, explained to her my situation, and she said, "Kelly, no problem. We'll go and get you an abortion." Now, I need you to understand that this woman was not a stranger to me. Her daughter was my age. We grew up together. Her brother was older, who I got pregnant with. But when I went to this woman, she was a leader in our community. She was a leader in her church. She taught Sunday school. She was the head of the PTA. She worked for the Department of Education. She was our team mom for my softball team. So when I went to this woman and I said, "I'm pregnant," she said, "No problem, Kelly. We'll go and we'll get you an abortion." And I didn't question it, because surely this woman who I trusted, who I'd known my whole life, would not tell me something that would harm me. And I didn't understand the realities of abortion. This was many years ago. I'm not going to tell you how many, but this was many years ago. And so abortion wasn't something that was everywhere. But I didn't understand the realities of the procedure, but I very much knew that I was pregnant and I did not want to be. And this was, I was told by her, my answer. And so at 15, she drove me to our local abortion provider, dropped me off with a wad of cash, and I went in alone and had my first abortion. I walked in a nationally ranked tennis player. I walked in a straight-A student. I walked in a regular church attender. And I walked out and I turned from everything that was going good in my life. I became very promiscuous. I started drinking excessively. I started doing drugs. I even ended up running drugs for the Puerto Rican mafia. And every kind of depravity that goes along with that lifestyle came into my life. And I welcomed it because I was looking for anything to make me feel better about myself. I was looking for anything to give me purpose and give me value and give me meaning and to cover and numb the pain that I had from that abortion. Several years later, I was working in a bar and I was selling drugs out the back and bartending out the front. And I was tired of the chaos. I was tired of seeing my friends die, and I was tired of the domestic abuse and tired of all of that. And I said, I want to do something to help people. And so I looked in my local newspaper. Now, knowing the crowd in this audience, probably about half of you remember when we looked in the newspaper for a job. And so for my young people, you would look in the newspaper for a job, and it wasn't like now where you can click and get all the details. It would just say something simply like receptionist, and it would give you an address, some very brief details, and then you would go to that location and fill out an application or drop off a resume. Now again, this was not the time of GPS on our phones, so I went to my computer and I put in the address on MapQuest after going through the dial-up. Some of you in the room remember, right? And I go through the dial-up and it comes to the MapQuest. I put in the address. I get the directions on a piece of paper. Wow, right, kids? Some things have gotten better with time. And I follow the directions and I'm driving through the directions and I pull in to the parking lot of where I had had my first abortion. And I walked in the door and I got hired on the spot as the receptionist, making $18 an hour. Now, this was over 20 years ago, which $18 an hour now for a receptionist is really good money. 20 years ago was exceptional money. So when they asked me to do things like edit magazines, and you're all saying edit magazines, I thought this was an abortion provider. Why were you doing journalism? No, that's not what I mean. What we would do is we would take the magazines, and anywhere where there was a picture of a baby, or diapers, or an engagement ring, a minivan, anything that might cue that maternal instinct in her, we would cut those pages out. The other part of my job as the receptionist was the reception room, which makes sense. And so when men would come with their girlfriends or spouses or wives, in the state of Virginia at that time, there was a 24-hour waiting period. So you would come for your first appointment where we would do a consultation, which was a 3-minute video, some paperwork, a little bit of blood work, and then we'd send you on your way. So the guys would come for that first appointment, and when they would come, we would send all the girls back together to watch this video, and we would turn the heat very, very hot, or the air conditioning very, very cold, so that the guys would get up and leave. And when the ladies would come out, we would say, sweetheart, if he won't even support you for this appointment, what makes you think he'll support you for a child? So men in this room, you're hearing from the media, no uterus, no opinion. That we don't want a bunch of old white men telling us what to do with our bodies. Well, I want you to know that the abortion industry knows how important your voice is. Now, the other part of my job as the receptionist was the recovery room. At our facility, the majority of our appointments were done with a sedation appointment. And so that sedation was a mixture of drugs, fentanyl being one of them. It's a twilight sedation. So I'm gonna talk to 2 different groups in the room. We've got group 1. If you've ever had a colonoscopy, don't raise your hand. But you understand what a twilight sedation is, right? Group 2, who has not yet had a colonoscopy, if you are over the age of 45, you need to have one, PSA. If you are under that age and have not yet, and have had some kind of oral surgery or knee surgery, young people, you've seen the videos on Instagram or TikTok where the people go and get their wisdom teeth pulled and they come out and they think zombies are chasing them, right? They're fully aware of what's going on, but they're not really aware of what's going on. That is a twilight sedation. Now, the purpose of the twilight sedation is, one, it prevents pain. It's an anesthesia. The second purpose of the twilight sedation is it is an amnesiac. It prevents you from remembering the procedure. Again, colonoscopy people, how many of you want to remember your colonoscopy? Well, let me let you in on a little secret. No one wants to remember their abortion. And so the abortion industry uses that to prevent people from remembering their abortion. So when you hear women say things like, it wasn't that bad, really? Do you remember it? Because I've had 4, 2 first trimester, 1 second trimester, and 1 by chemical. And the only one that I remember was my chemical abortion, which I'll get to in a couple of minutes. But after these women have had that anesthesia, 20 minutes on the dot, we would release them, give them their cookie, their juice, their clothes, their birth control, and let them out the door. The number of women that I saw in that recovery room hemorrhaging from perforated uteruses, bowels, cervixes was what led me to leave the abortion industry. Because I was one of those women. In fact, I went and looked at my chart to see if I had suffered that consequence. Thankfully, I had not. But I left the abortion industry, and I would love to tell you I became the great pro-life advocate that I am now, but I was still caught in shame. I still didn't understand my value. I still didn't know my identity. I was still caught up in drugs. And so I continued down that path and had those several more abortions and ended up living in New Orleans with a boyfriend. It was a very violent relationship. We decided I was gonna come home. And before the night I came home, we went out to celebrate. And it ended like most nights in a fight. He comes home, several hours later, I come home. And in the fight, we had ripped the door off the door frame and there was a 2x4 laying on the ground. And he pushes me on the ground, he gets over top of me, he grabs the 2x4, he goes to swing to hit me over the head with it, and mid-swing, he drops the board, punches me in the face several times, my face explodes, blood goes everywhere, and he's like, oh gosh, the fight has, I've really hurt her. So the fight stops. And the next morning I wake up and I have text messages and phone calls from my father in Virginia, who was the last person you want to speak to after a night like that, so I didn't. 24 hours later, I pack my belongings and I come home. My dad meets me. Now, he gets out and I have 2 swollen eyes. I barely can see. My nose is flat and crooked. My mouth is bloody. And he looks at me and he starts to cry. And I said, oh, Dad, I was in a car accident. You know, the things women say. And he said, Kelly, 2 nights ago, I was asleep. And in the middle of the night, I was awoken by the Lord, and I had a vision of you laying dead on the floor with your head split wide open. And so I began to pray. So if you think your prayer doesn't matter, I'm here because of my Father's prayers. Several weeks later, I'm sitting in the front row of my dad's church because my dad was a pastor. And he gives the altar call, and I hear, as clearly as I've ever heard anything, I hear the voice of my Father God, and he says, have you had enough? Now, this was not the voice that I had expected to hear from God. See, I thought God was disappointed in me. I thought he was angry at me. But this was not that voice. This was the voice like Adam walking in the garden every day with God in the cool of the day. And Adam sins and goes and hides, and God comes to find him. And he gets in the garden and he says, Adam, where are you? You see, that is how I had always heard that voice. Shame, anger, disappointment. But in reality, in the Hebrew, it's this sound that's almost like a guttural cry. It's like a "Hurrah." It was Adam. Where are you? Kelly, have you had enough? I said, but God, how could you love me? How could you forgive me for all the things that I've done? And he said, if you follow me, I will make beauty from ashes, which is scripture. And I said, but God, how are you going to make beautiful being molested at 3 and raped at 13 and the abortions and the domestic violence and all these things? How are you going to make that beautiful? And he didn't answer me, because sometimes God speaks in an audible voice and other times he is silent. But I want to tell you that every place where the enemy meant to steal, kill, and destroy, God is not only saved, but he has healed, he has restored, and he has redeemed. And one of the ways that he does that is by me being here with you today. You see, you can't make beautiful being molested at 3. But when I share that story, it brings hope to someone in this room who was molested at 3. You can't make beautiful having an abortion at 15. But when I share that story, it brings hope to someone in this room, or a parent whose child has wandered. And so I want to tell you, everyone in this room that is active in the pro-life movement, your story is important. Whether it's a story like mine, that is full of situations and things that are horrible to imagine, or whether it's the story of some of you that were raised and saved at a young age and followed the Lord all your life and never strayed. Your story matters. And this world out there is looking for our stories. Someone showed me, Pat showed me earlier today, a picture of an escort down at the abortion facility here in Philadelphia, pointing to heaven with that finger, wearing a suit with a chicken. And you know what I saw when I saw that person? I saw a person who has an abortion story who has never been healed. That recovery room that I told you about, it did not matter whether those women came in with 5 children in tow, conflicted about their decision, or shouting their abortion. In that room, every woman was sad. It is the saddest place on earth. But women are being told that abortion is empowering. That it is, as women, it's part of your next steps. You start your menstruation and then you get an abortion. It's like part of becoming a woman. And so when those women are sitting in that recovery room and they feel conflicted and they feel sad and they feel all of those feelings that they all feel in that room, and they're not being told that they have a right to feel that way, do you know what they turn with that feeling? They turn it to anger. This generation, young people in this room, your people that you're in school with and playing sports with, are looking for a reason to live, and they are looking for a reason to die. And those people are coming into places like Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers, feeling lost and feeling confused, and they are saying, we've got the answer for you. We have the solution for you. You're 15, you don't want to tell your parents? Come to us. We'll take care of it. You're 17, you're addicted to drugs? Come to us. We'll take care of it. You're 19, you're in domestic violence? Come to us. We'll take care of it. And when you leave, we'll give you a bumper sticker and a pink hat and a cause to stand for and a thing to champion and a reason to live. But the reality is there are organizations in this room right now that when that 15-year-old comes to them, they're going to say, look, sweetie, this is going to be a hard conversation with your parents, but we're going to walk with you in that conversation. We're going to be there for that conversation. We're going to support you. We're going to support your child because you have a hope and you have a future, and we are here for you. Abortion is not your best option. And when that 17-year-old comes in addicted to drugs, they're gonna say, we want to get you off drugs. Drugs are not the best thing for you. Abortion isn't gonna be your answer. It's gonna be another thing to pile on top of your shame. Let us walk with you. Or when they're in domestic violence, they're gonna say, you don't wanna be tied to that man and have his baby. We understand that, but sweetie, we need to get you safe. You don't have to be tied to him. We'll be with you. We'll walk with you. And so it's important that every organization in this room is here and that we understand the faces of abortion. I am one of the faces of abortion. And I so appreciate what you are doing in this city, bringing unity, bringing forces together where you've got one that helps at this stage and one that helps at this stage and one who's doing political stuff and one who's on college campuses talking to people and one who's going into the high school. If we are going to defeat abortion, if we are not unified like you are in this room, we will not see that happen. And so I want to applaud you. I've been all over this country this fall, and seeing this in this room gives me hope. That there is actually hope, that the pro-life movement will come together and actually save babies. Because it's not enough to be against something. Not is not enough. Being against abortion is not enough. We need every part of the body working together. Now I'm gonna finish up very quickly, but I wanna talk to you very quickly about chemical abortion. Because it is the hot topic right now of our time. Like I said, I've had 4 abortions. And of all of my abortions, my chemical abortion was the most traumatic. Because I didn't go to a building across town. I didn't sit in the chair of a doctor who performed it on me with medication that prevented me from remembering it. I did it at home, alone, by myself, to myself. And I had to decide what I was gonna do with the consequences of my decision. Do you flush or do you not? And I know that's a hard thing to hear. And I'm sorry for the young people in this room, but you need to know, everyone in this room, that the abortion provider is no longer just the building on the corner in the bad part of town, but it is every one of our homes, every one of our dorm rooms, your schools. And so we need to understand the realities of chemical abortion. I could sit at this table right now and in 5 minutes order abortion pills delivered to my house for $150 with no evidence of being pregnant, no verification of age, nothing. And the other side is pushing that. I heard earlier tonight that 55%, that's what we know of. That doesn't count the Hey Janes and the Mexicos and the Indias and all of the other places that are filtering these drugs into our children. And church, I'm gonna speak to you for a minute. If you are not talking about abortion in your church, you are pro-choice. If we could end abortion in our churches, we would end abortion. 40% of women who have abortions are regularly attending our churches. And so it's time to stand up. It's time to speak. It's time to make a stand against abortion in our churches. There were some numbers tonight, 28 confirmed babies saved from the abortion pill reversal. And you hear that number and you're like, that's great. But I want you to look. That's 1, 2, 3 tables. We have doctors, we have lawyers, we have teachers, we have pastors sitting at these tables. 1,092 calls, that's this room. So look around this room. That's how many women, that's how many babies were called this year. Now, in a minute, Ashley's gonna come up. I asked to do the ask because I love asking for money. My dad said, when I told him this is what I was doing, he said, "Sweetheart, you've been preparing for this your whole life." And my husband said, "Yes, sir, she has. But I want to tell you another quick story and then I'm done. I was at an event like this and I got to this point in the evening and I said, "Such and such pregnancy center needs your money." And as soon as I did, I heard the Lord say, "No, they don't," which, if you don't know, is a very weird thing when you're on stage. But I just kind of put it behind me and I was like, all right, we'll talk about that later. And I'm in my car and I'm driving and I'm like, "Hey, God, can we talk about that?" And he said, "Yes, sweetheart, I love to talk to you." And I said, "God, what did you mean by that? They don't need their money." And he said, "Kelly, I have cattle on 1,000 hills. I can put a coin in a fish's mouth. I will provide for all of their needs according to my riches and glory because they are doing my kingdom work." And I said, "Well, God, that's great, but why am I here?" And he said, "Well, Kelly, let's talk about it." And I said, "Okay." And he took me to the Bible, which isn't that fun when God does that, and the wedding at Cana, which, if you're not familiar with, it was Jesus' first recorded miracle. And he is at the wedding. They're at a Jewish wedding. They ran out of wine, which was a big faux pas in those days. And his mother, Mary, comes over to him and says, basically, "Jesus, fix it." And Jesus says, "Woman, it's not my time." And then Mary goes to the servants and says, "Look, do whatever he says." And then Jesus, because he was without sin and a very obedient, good son, fixes it. But the way that he fixes it is he tells the servants to get the barrels where the wine was stored, to take them outside, to fill them with water, and to bring them back. And then Jesus turned the water into wine. And God says, "Kelly, do you know why I did it like that?" I'm like, "No, God, I've never really thought about it, why you did it like that." And he said, "You know your story." "Yes, God, I know my story." "You know your story in the part where I wake up your dad 1,200 miles away, I give him a vision, he prays for you, and then I save your life. Do you know why I did it that way?" I'm like, "No, God, but I have always wondered." I mean, there's a lot of ways you could have done it, God. You could have had me go home with somebody else. You could have had him pass out. You could have had an angel come and smite him. There's a lot of ways you could have done that to save my life. Why did you do it that way? And he said, "Kelly, I had saved your life hundreds of times by that supernaturally, but you needed the partnership of your father for you to see my hand in your life." And I went, "Oh." You see, Jesus could have done it any number of ways. He could have said, "Wine," right? And there would have been wine. He could have taken the empty barrels and filled them with wine. He could have done it any number of ways. But he wanted the partnership of the people in the room. Well, people in the room, I'm asking you now, how are you going to partner with God? Thank you.